All right, today we are cracking the code on one of the most important and, let's be honest, confusing documents a California homeowner gets, the property tax bill. Let's just dive right in and make sense of it all. I mean, if you've ever just stared at your bill, totally baffled, wondering where on earth these numbers come from, you're not alone. Not at all. It can feel like this big, unsolvable puzzle, right? With all these weird dates and line items. It's a lot. But here is the really good news. You don't need that decoder ring. The whole system, with all of its quirks, is really built on the foundation of one single game-changing law from way back in 1978. If you can understand that one thing, you'll understand the core of your entire bill. Okay, before we get to that big law, let's start with a basic term, ad valorem tax. It's Latin, and it just means according to value. That's it. So the tax you pay isn't some flat fee for everyone. Nope, it is directly tied to how much your property is worth. This is the bedrock principle we got to keep in mind. And that brings us to the main event, Proposition 13. This was a huge deal passed by voters back in 1978, and it basically created the rule book that every county in California still follows today. It put two very specific, very powerful limits on that ad valorem tax we just talked about. So rule number one, the most famous one, is this. The main property tax, your general levy, cannot be more than 1% of your property's full cash value, or what we call its assessed value. That 1% cap, it's the cornerstone of the whole system. But there's a second rule that's just as important. To stop your taxes from skyrocketing as property values climb, Prop 13 also says your home's assessed value can't go up by more than 2% a year. This creates a really predictable, stable tax bill, year after year. This leads to a really crucial question. If your assessed value is kind of locked in and only inches up by 2% a year, when does it ever get reset to what your house is actually worth on the market today? This is the key to understanding why your neighbor might be paying a totally different tax amount than you are for a similar house. Well, it turns out there are only 4 things that can trigger a full reappraisal. The big one, the most common one, is a change in ownership, basically when you buy a property. The others are when you finish new construction, like adding a room, or on the flip side, if your property's value actually goes down, which can trigger a temporary reduction. But without one of these events, that low assessed value just stays put. Okay, so we know how the tax is calculated. Now let's look at when you actually pay it. The property tax calendar is, well, it's weird. It doesn't follow the normal January to December year, and that's where a lot of people get tripped up. So let's map it out. The fiscal year for taxes runs from July 1st to June 30th. It all kicks off with something called the lien date on January 1st. Just think of this as the day the county officially says, okay, we have a claim on this property for the taxes that'll be due. From there, your bill is split in two. The first half is due November 1st, and you're late after December 10th. The second half is due February 1st and becomes delinquent after April 10th. Getting these dates right is super important. And there's a really good reason to get them right. If you miss a deadline, they slap a pretty hefty 10% penalty on that payment, just like that. It's a steep price to pay for being even one day late, so you for sure want to mark those dates on your calendar.
Now, let's tackle another super common question. If Prop 13 caps the tax at 1%, why is my total tax rate closer to, say, 1.25% or maybe even higher? The answer is in these extra charges called special assessments.
So think of it this way, that 1% general tax funds big, broad stuff like the county government. Special assessments, on the other hand, pay for specific local things that directly benefit your property. And here's the kicker. They are not subject to that 1% cap. So what are we talking about here? Well, it could be bonds for a new school through a Mello-Roos district, or maybe charges for your street lighting, sewer services, garbage pickup, or even fire protection. These are all things that voters in your area approved, and they get itemized on your bill. That's what makes up the difference between that 1% base and your total payment. All right, now for the part everybody really wants to know about. How can you actually lower your bill? The state has some really valuable exemptions and tax breaks, but you usually have to be proactive and apply for them. The most common tax break by far is the homeowner's exemption. It's simple. If you own your home and it's your main residence, you can get a $7,000 reduction in your assessed value. Look, it's not a fortune, but hey, it's a consistent little bit of savings every single year. There are also some really powerful ways to avoid that big reappraisal when a property changes hands. For instance, you can often transfer a property between parents and kids or between spouses without resetting the tax clock. And get this, homeowners over 55 can sometimes take their low tax base with them to a new home. These are huge benefits that can save families thousands. Okay, so we've covered the annual bill, but there are a few other taxes that only pop up when you're in the middle of a deal, either buying or selling a place. If you're a new buyer, you're going to get something in the mail called a supplemental tax bill. Just think of it as a one-time catch-up bill. It covers the difference between what the old owner was paying and your new, higher tax bill for the rest of that fiscal year. It surprises a lot of new homeowners, but the good news is it only happens once. When you're signing all those papers at the close of escrow, you'll also see the documentary transfer tax. This is basically a tax on the sale itself. The base rate is typically 55 cents for every $500 of the home's value. It's just another one of those transactional costs to be aware of. Now, for the sellers, there's a massive tax benefit on the table. Thanks to a law passed in 1997, if you've lived in your home for 2 out of the last 5 years, you can exclude a huge chunk of your profit from capital gains tax. We're talking up to $250,000 for a single person and a whopping $500,000 for a married couple. That is a game changer. And for real estate investors, there's an even more powerful tool. It's called a 1031 exchange. It lets you sell an investment property and kick the can down the road on paying capital gains taxes, as long as you roll all that money into a new, similar investment property. It's an absolute cornerstone strategy for building wealth in real estate. Another smart strategy for sellers is what's called an installment sale. So instead of getting all your money in one lump sum and a giant tax bill to go with it, you can spread the payments and the taxes over several years. Like in this example, if your profit margin is 30% and you get $50,000 a year, only $15,000 of that is taxable profit each year. Way more manageable. So let's wrap up with a final thought. This whole system we've been talking about, this entire rulebook, was written in 1978. Think about that. It was a completely different world for California's economy and housing market. Now, this system has given homeowners stability for decades, no doubt about it. But it also creates these massive inequities we see today. So the big question is, how does a system built for the 70s evolve to meet the challenges of right now and tomorrow?